Imagine discovering that the person you love and trust the most is hiding a secret capable of destroying everything you believed. That's what happened in the Fallon Fridley case. A story of betrayal, lies, and a truth so dark that no one could have predicted it. What this man discovered changed his life forever, and you need to know how it all ended. There are secrets that can't even be revealed here on YouTube. That's why I prepared something exclusive. The final dossier, the forbidden report ignored by the media, it's all there. Access it now through the first pinned comment. But hurry, this content could be taken down at any moment. Don't miss the truth. He never imagined his life would change so much in a single night. Everything seemed in order. He had a structured family, a stable job, and a marriage that, to him, was the foundation of everything. But sometimes what seems perfect is just a facade. And in the case of Fallon Fridley, what was behind this facade was so disturbing that even today, it's hard to comprehend how everything reached this point. Fallon was a 2-year-old child, full of energy, with a smile that could light up any room. Her parents, Kristen and Cameron, had a routine like many families during the pandemic. With daycares closed, they trusted their friend Kirsty Flood to take care of Fallon while they worked. It was an arrangement that seemed convenient. After all, Kirsty was considered almost part of the family, someone they trusted completely. On the morning of December 9th, 2020, everything started like any other day. Fallon had her almond milk and was left at Kirsty's house as usual. Cameron, who worked as a landscaper, dropped her off at 6:30 a.m. before starting his routine. For Kristen, who was a veterinary technician, it seemed like just another normal day. But in the afternoon, a message from Kirsty completely changed the course of the story. At 1:30 p.m., Kirsty sent a text to Kristen asking if Fallon could spend the night at her house. It was an unexpected request since Fallon had never slept out before, but Kirsty explained that her daughter Harper was excited for a kind of pajama night. Kristen, with no reason to be suspicious, agreed. Later, when Kristen tried to call Kirsty at 4:30 p.m., she didn't get an answer. A message arrived shortly after, saying that they were at the park and Kirsty's phone was low on battery. Although Kristen found this a bit strange, she trusted her friend. It wasn't typical behavior, but nothing that raised a huge alarm. When they finally managed a video call around 6:30 p.m., Kristen noticed that something was wrong. Fallon seemed drowsy and uninterested, but Kirsty claimed that the little girl was just tired after a long day of playing with Harper. For Kristen, that explanation was enough at the time. After all, what could possibly be wrong? The answer came hours later, at 9:20 p.m., when Kirsty called Kristen in distress, saying that Fallon had hit her head on a slide at the park and wasn't responding anymore. The paramedics were already on the way, but for Kristen and Cameron, it all felt like a nightmare. They rushed to the hospital, but what awaited them was even more terrible than they could have imagined. At the hospital, doctors revealed that Fallon's injuries were not consistent with a simple fall at the park. There were signs of severe trauma, indicating something much more serious. Kirsty's story began to fall apart, and the details that emerged in the following days only made everything more disturbing. During questioning, Kirsty became increasingly nervous and contradictory. First, she insisted on the story that Fallon had fallen off a slide. Then she mentioned that the girl had become drowsy after dinner, but couldn't explain why it took so long to call the paramedics. Kirsty admitted to placing Fallon in a cold bath to wake her up. But what seemed like a desperate move quickly turned into suspicion when the police found evidence that contradicted her words. Doctors discovered that Fallon had severe internal injuries that couldn't have been caused by a simple fall. The investigation quickly pointed to Kirsty's house as the place where it all happened. But what really happened in that house was still a mystery. Messages on Kirsty's phone, recovered by the police, brought a chilling revelation. On the same day Fallon died, Kirsty had searched terms like how to control anger with children and what to do when you feel like hurting someone. These searches were made shortly before Kirsty sent the message asking Fallon to stay at her house. With so many contradictions and emerging evidence, Kristen and Cameron's trust was completely shattered. Kirsty was no longer just the trusted friend taking care of Fallon. She was now the main suspect in a case that would shake everyone's life. What really happened that night? Was Kirsty hiding something, or was there someone else involved? These are questions that still haunt those who knew Fallon. And as the case unfolds, every detail leads us to question just how far we can trust someone. When I first learned about the Fallon case, it took me a few minutes to absorb what I had just read. You know that feeling when something feels deeply wrong, but you just can't put your finger on exactly what? That's how I felt. The story affected me because deep down, We all want to believe that the people closest to us. I keep thinking about how this story could have been different. Fallon was only 2 years old and her family trusted the person who took care of her. It made me reflect on how sometimes we ignore warning signs, small details that could save a life, but in the rush of everyday life, we just let them slip by. And that's what motivates me to share this story here. It's not just to understand what happened, but to reflect on the impact of our choices, how the instinct to protect those we love can fail when trust is broken. What happened to Fallon is devastating, but what we've discovered so far is just the beginning. The story took a new direction when doctors examined Fallon's injuries and realized that something didn't add up. Kirsty's explanation, that Fallon had fallen from a slide, seemed simple, almost plausible, but the severity of the injuries told a different story. How could a fall in a park cause such severe trauma? That was the first question that raised suspicions. And as the police began to investigate, more strange details emerged. Kirsty insisted that Fallon had tripped and hit her head, but couldn't explain why it took so long to ask for help. First, she claimed she tried to wake up Fallon by placing her in a cold bath. Then she said the girl was acting normally before suddenly becoming unconscious. The versions varied, and the more Kirsty spoke, the more inconsistencies appeared. During the interrogations, she even changed small details multiple times, leaving the police with the sense that she was trying to cover something up. The most intriguing part came with the messages recovered from Kirsty's phone. A few hours before Fallon was taken to the hospital, she had searched online for things like what to do when you feel like hurting someone and how to deal with anger in a child. These details changed the tone of the investigation. It was no longer just about whether Kirsty was negligent, but whether she had intended to harm Fallon from the beginning. Additionally, there was her behavior on the day of the incident. Kirsty paused to smoke a cigarette while Fallon was unconscious. Who does that in the middle of an emergency? And why, instead of calling 911 immediately, did she try a home remedy by placing Fallon in the bath? These choices made no sense for someone who was genuinely trying to save a child. Investigators also noticed contradictions between Kirsty's story and her boyfriend Jeff's. While she claimed that Fallon had been acting strangely all night, Jeff said he saw the girl walking and even interacting normally during dinner. This raised an important question. Who was telling the truth, or were they both hiding something together? The analysis of security cameras from Kirsty's house revealed another strange point. Although the footage didn't show anything directly incriminating, Kirsty's behavior while handing over the videos caught the detective's attention. She hesitated, tried to manipulate what would be shown, and at one point even deleted messages from her phone while under investigation. These actions alone were enough to raise suspicions. Then came the biggest revelation. The medical examiner stated that Fallon's injuries were not consistent with a simple fall or domestic accident. The internal injuries indicated repeated assaults, something Kirsty had never mentioned in her statements. This point was crucial in shifting the focus of the investigation. But here's the question. If Kirsty was the only adult responsible for Fallon that day, how did these injuries happen without her noticing? Or was she lying all along? This is where the investigation deepens and begins to reveal the truth Kirsty had been desperately trying to hide. Now let's go behind the scenes of the interrogations and the evidence that finally unmasked Kirsty. Prepare yourself, because the discoveries ahead will completely change the way you view this case. When the police began to analyze the contradictions in Kirsty's statement, it became clear that there were more questions than answers. Her version of what happened to Fallon was confusing and full of gaps. But then, an essential question arose. What if this wasn't just a case of negligence or a poorly explained accident? What if something deeper was happening? This doubt opened up a series of theories that would place investigators in an even greater dilemma. One of the first theories raised was that Kirsty wasn't alone when Fallon suffered the injuries. During the interrogation, Kirsty mentioned that her boyfriend Jeff was at home that night, but his story was also inconsistent. Jeff said he didn't see Fallon until dinner, but his description of how she acted, quiet, not wanting to eat, contradicted the messages Kirsty sent, which claimed Fallon was fine until she suddenly felt ill. This raised the hypothesis that Jeff might be hiding something. Did he know what happened? Investigators looked into Kirsty's behavior in the weeks leading up to the incident. She had a history of impulsive behavior and had been involved in domestic violence in the past. This made investigators consider whether Kirsty might have lost her patience with Fallon in a moment of stress. The searches on her phone, including phrases like, "What to do when you feel like hurting someone," suggested she was dealing with unstable emotions that day. But here's a crucial detail. Why, knowing that these searches could incriminate her, did she make them on her phone? Was it carelessness or a desperate attempt to find answers to something that had already happened? Meanwhile, the medical analysis brought another scary possibility. Fallon showed signs of internal trauma that couldn't have occurred just on the night she was taken to the hospital. This raised the theory that the injuries might have been accumulated over time. Was Kirsty hurting Fallon gradually, hiding the signs from Kristen and Cameron? Or perhaps the injuries were caused by someone else who had access to the girl in the days before. This theory gained strength when investigators started reviewing Kirsty's messages, looking for any sign that someone else might have been involved. The final theory, and perhaps the most disturbing, involved an almost unbelievable possibility. What if Kirsty was deliberately trying to frame someone else? During the interrogation, Kirsty mentioned several times that she didn't trust Cameron, Fallon's stepfather. She insinuated that he had a shady past and even suggested that he might be responsible for Fallon's strange behavior. But there was no concrete evidence linking Cameron to what happened that night. So why did Kirsty keep bringing his name up? Could it have been an attempt to deflect attention away from herself? As investigators worked to unravel these theories, one thing became clear. Every new detail raised more questions rather than providing answers. But there was something the detectives hadn't revealed yet, something that could connect all these points. Kirsty's phone, the security footage, and the contradictory statements seemed to hold a key piece to solving the mystery. And that's where the investigation takes a turn. What was found in the files recovered from Kirsty's phone completely changed the course of the case, revealing secrets no one expected. In the next segment, we'll show how this discovery not only exposed the truth about what happened to Fallon, but also dismantled all the lies Kirsty had built. The security footage from Kirsty's house showed an initial sequence that seemed unremarkable. Children playing, casual conversations, and an otherwise normal routine. But as detectives examined the moments before the ambulance was called, they noticed something odd. Kirsty left the house for a few minutes while Fallon was already unconscious. She went to the car, but returned empty-handed. What did she go outside for? This behavior raised even more suspicions. Kirsty had already delayed calling 911, and now detectives needed to figure out what she was doing at the car. What was hidden there? It was then that the investigators decided to review all her phone messages, cross-referencing the information with the timestamps from the cameras. That's when they found something disturbing. Kirsty had sent a message that simply said, "Don't tell anyone." Now the pieces were starting to connect. Who was this message for? What was Kirsty trying to cover up? This is where the clues begin to intertwine, revealing an even darker plot. In the next segment, we'll break down the evidence and uncover how these discoveries impacted the direction of the investigation. The discovery that investigators made was so unexpected that it completely changed the direction of the case. By cross-referencing Kirsty's phone messages with the timestamps from the security cameras, they realized something alarming. That short message, "Don't tell anyone," sent shortly before she called 911, was addressed to a person who, until then, hadn't even been mentioned: her mother, Karen. This opened up a new line of questioning. What was Karen's involvement? And why did Kirsty need her help at this critical moment? Upon investigating further, detectives realized that Karen had made a call immediately after receiving her daughter's message. The call was to a lawyer for a close family friend. This raised a new theory. Could Karen already have known what had happened and was trying to protect her daughter? Kirsty's behavior was beginning to seem more calculated. And here came one of the most important revelations in the case: the real reason she had gone to the car. In the car, investigators found a bag with children's clothes stained with blood and a soaked towel. What did this mean? Apparently, Kirsty had tried to hide these pieces of evidence. Not only reinforced that Kirsty had something to hide, but also raised the possibility of premeditation. And more, why were the clothes and towel there, instead of in the laundry or the trash? The answer came from the nearby establishment's security footage. Kirsty had thrown something in a trash bin hours earlier. With this, detectives began to piece together the puzzle of a possible attempt to cover up a crime. The pieces were connecting in a chilling way, but there was more. As they analyzed the recorded conversation from Kirsty's interrogation, detectives noticed that she repeatedly referred to Fallon as a difficult child who didn't eat properly, and that this stressed her out. This repetition began to sound like an excuse, a way to justify her own impatience. And then came the most disturbing revelation. During the forensic examination of her phone, investigators discovered that Kirsty had searched online for methods to silence children, including topics on how to deal with screaming and even ways to calm a child using physical methods. This made it clear that she had been dealing with extremely unstable emotions, and at some point that had translated into violence against Fallon. But what stood out the most was how Kirsty tried to manipulate the details to deflect blame. Throughout the investigation, she tried to pin the responsibility on Jeff, her boyfriend, and even on Fallon's stepfather, Cameron. The police noticed that this tactic was used whenever interrogations began to pressure her. It was as if she knew the evidence was piling up and was desperate to avoid taking the blame. At this point, the original narrative that Fallon had suffered a simple accident no longer made any sense. The blood-stained clothes, the message to her mother, the searches on her phone, and the constant changes in Kirsty's statements painted a much darker picture. The case was no longer about negligence or a moment of carelessness. The question now was, what really happened that night? And why did Kirsty decide to act so calculatingly to cover it up? This story is undoubtedly one of the most devastating we've seen, not just because of what happened to Fallon, but because of the betrayal that destroyed so many lives. Kirsty Flood, someone who should have cared for and protected, became the center of a tragedy that can never be forgotten. It's impossible not to wonder what could have been done differently to change the outcome. Were the signs there all along? The Fallon Fridley case is a cruel reminder of how the people closest to us can carry dark secrets. And that's why we must continue questioning and seeking answers. After all, how can we protect those who depend on us the most if we're not paying attention to every detail? This story leaves a mark, but it also calls us to action. Protect children, hold the guilty accountable, and never stop searching for the truth. If you've made it this far, comment, "I am a guardian of the truth," so I know you followed it through to the end. I'd love to know your opinion. Which detail of this story impacted you the most? Leave it in the comments and feel free to suggest themes you'd like to see here on the channel. And for those of you always looking for mysteries that stir the mind and heart, the next video will reveal a twist no one expected, and it might be even more shocking than this one. Click on the screen now and prepare for another investigation that will leave you speechless. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and share this video. The truth needs to be heard. We'll see you in the next mystery.